The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of Green Acres and our guests. These general gardening tips and suggestions may work for you, as well as those from alternative sources. When using any garden products or tools, read and follow all label directions. And learn how to make your yard summer strong at bewatersmart.info.
The Green Acres Garden Podcast is the podcast dedicated to helping gardeners hone their growing skills while we celebrate our love of plants. So whether you're new to growing or a seasoned gardener, you're sure to learn something new. Join the fun as we have conversations with world-class growers, passionate green thumbs, and professional garden experts from Green Acres Nursery and Supply. Listen every week. We'll answer questions you didn't know you had. All right, and away we grow. We're off and running. It's that time of week, garden friends. Thank you so much for tuning in. We really appreciate it. This is the Green Acres Garden Podcast, the world's best garden podcast. Just don't ask to see my metrics or my data because I cannot share that. We'll just assume this is the world's best garden podcast.
It's the best in the world.
I'm your host, Kevin Jordan, and I love plants just like you. Back in studio with my good buddy, Austin Blank. How's it going, Austin?
Hello, Kevin, and hello to all of our listeners. Welcome back to the show. It's my favorite time of the week. Kevin, what's in store for this week? What do you got going on?
Spring is here, my friend.
I know, it's so exciting.
No looking back. We're only looking forward. There's so much energy right now in the garden. With my own students, we're out there. We're removing all the cool season plants. We're cultivating. We're sifting and adding fresh compost into the garden.
Nice.
And we're getting in those peppers, those tomatoes, and all of our warm season crops that we love. I cannot wait for some fresh pesto. Love basil.
California pesto.
Yes, I'll give it a go. But there's so much energy, not only in our own garden. I was in the nursery the other day. People are buzzing around like bees, and they're scooping up plants. I think it's just that time of year. Frost is kind of behind us. The soil is warming up. The nights are kind of not getting too cold, and the days are getting longer and hotter. So for a lot of us, I think people are already getting some of those plants already in. I know we're right at the cusp ourselves. So I think this week's episode is going to be perfect addition to that energy and that vibe that's going on right now in the spring gardens. I know of all of our listeners who are listening, if you're gardening at all, you know it's go time right now. And so for us, hopefully this will be the perfect addition to your week. We got to sit down with somebody who has 40 years experience in the garden industry, someone with an incredible background and knowledge, really focused around soils. We're talking about Chris Totten of EB Stone Organics, where we're really going to have a great discussion all about soil building, how to find success in the garden, and how to continue that success on each and every year. So if you're wondering right now, it's like, man, I want to grow an abundant crop. I want cucumbers. I want melons. I want tomatoes and zucchini and everything.
Yes.
That success is going to start below your feet. It's going to all start with the soil. And so our guest this week is going to give us so much information on how to feed that soil, why it's important, how soil kind of affects our plant's growth. And we're going to get everything we're going to go back 400 plus million years, talk about evolution, about the plants and soil and fungi. We're going to talk about the different soil particles that are in soil and how that affects our dirt, the ecosystem of soil and what that means for our plants and how to nourish that ecosystem. There's so much that we covered with Chris. I was fascinated. I was on the edge of my seat like a little schoolboy, just like taking notes. I really love these talks. And for me, it really reinforces the concept that if you want to be successful in the garden, we always talk about right plant, right place. And of course, that's true. But you can put the right plant in the right place. But if you don't give that plant the soil that it requires, then you'll struggle. So if you want to have a thriving vegetable garden, or you want to have a flower bed that is the envy of all your neighbors, this is the episode for you. And like I said, success all starts with the soil.
I love that. All right. Well, we're talking to the best guy in the world to talk about this with. That's Chris Totten from EB Stone. They are a soil and compost provider. You see all their bags of a lot of different products.
Fertilizer, organics.
Yeah,
I love their stuff.
Lots of cool stuff. And I've personally used their products a lot and had great success. So let's go ahead and talk to Chris and find out more and dive into the science of soil biology and all the cool microscopic stuff that's happening down in that soil that we don't often shine a light on. Let's dive into it. Here we go.
The more you learn about soil biology, the more you learn about everything that's happening. My name's Chris. I work with EB Stone. You know, the 10 billion bacteria that are in a teaspoon of soil.
I love that fact.
Right?
I always use that with my kids. There's more bacteria in my hand right now than there are people on the planet.
Right.
Like, what?
Right.
But when we say soil, So what's the difference between soil versus the concept of dirt? Is there a difference?
Yeah, I mean, for me, dirt's like inert. Dirt is the stuff you want to sweep out of your garage.
It's underneath my nails right now.
Right? Whereas soil is a living, dynamic organism. I mean, it is actually, you know, in a healthy natural soil, there can be as many as 25,000 species of bacteria, microarthropods, springtails, rotifers, centipedes, earthworms, right? There's this huge, vast...
And they're all part of the soil.
And they're all part of it. There's pathogens, sure, there's funguses that are bad for plants, but then there's funguses that are really beneficial for plants. And it's all just there, and it's just a matter of to me, if you focus on that and you feed that system and you build your garden around your soil, everything else just follows.
I love it. So when we start with our native soils, can you kind of do maybe a crash course in the basics of soil? The soil particles, the three types.
So
there's sand,
there's sand, silt, and clay. And what I like to a good way to think about the difference in the sizes of sand, silt, and clay.
And these are the particles that make up soil.
Right, relative scale. You know, if you think of a beach ball.
I've used this with my students.
That would be the scale of the sand particles. And if you think of a baseball, a nice, Major League Baseball, that would be the scale of the silt particles. And then if you think of the ballpoint pen and the ball bearing in a ballpoint pen, that's your clay. So if you can imagine those in a beaker, for example, a gigantic beaker, the beach balls are very big. There's lots of volume of connected pore space.
They can only touch so much.
Right. So there's lots of big open pore space in that, right? But what does that mean for the garden? Water drains through very quickly. There's no place for nutrients to be held. So, sandy soils are typically kind of feast or famine. When you have water and nutrients, they're
better get on it.
Right. And then at a certain point it drains through. At the other extreme, you have all those ball bearings from the tips of ballpoint pens. There's a tremendous amount of pore space, right? If you think about all those little gaps between all those particles, there's just this vast volume of pore space. However, it's really poorly connected, so water doesn't drain through that. Air doesn't get into that very readily.
And this is the clay particles.
This would be the clay particles.
So small, they just pack together.
And so the extremes, and the magic is the solution is the same. If you add organic matter or compost, I'm going to use organic matter as this generic term. It could be manure, it could be compost, leaf litter. But if you add it to the sandy soil, you increase the ability of that sandy soil to retain nutrients. You increase the ability of that sandy soil to hold water. In soils, clay is the dominant factor in terms of nutrient holding capacity.
Why is that?
It's because of the chemistry of the soil. It has the negative charges, and you have the
cations and whatnot.
Exchange capacity, right? So the clays have a negative charge, and the nutrients like calcium, magnesium, ammonium, potassium are positive.
Now we're getting into
charge.
chemistry.
I hated chemistry until I got into soils,
and it made it interesting for you.
No, I want to know about.
Yeah, right.
I want to know about this part of chemistry. I don't want to really know about that part of chemistry, but this part of chemistry. By weight, compost has 30 times the cation exchange capacity of clay. Now, you're never going to supplant clay, right? There's just in a volume, acre furrow slice, I think there's 1.2 million pounds of soil. I mean, you're never going to have a very, very healthy, rich soil with lots of organic matter is probably 5%, right?
That's doable.
But you can create beneficial conditions by adding it. Again, with sand, poor drainage, or too well drained, poor nutrient holding capacity, you add the organic matter, you increase the water holding capacity, you increase the nutrient capacity. The clay soil, you have a tremendous amount of capacity to hold moisture and water, or nutrients in water, but the problem is it's dense and compacted. You get the organic matter in there, you get the biology kicking in, you start to get the crumbly soil structure.
Love it, yeah, those little crumbs.
Well,
I'm glad I have you here, because maybe you can dispel a myth, because I hear this all the time. It's like, oh, I've got really hard clay soil, it will not drain. And then I hear people saying, oh, I'm going to add some sand, because sand, you mentioned sand does help drain.
So in order to change,
what's wrong with that?
In order to change the texture of the soil, adding sand to clay, you have to add 60% of the total volume. And again, if I remember correctly, there are 1.2 million pounds in an acre furrow slice. That's, I think, 6 inches of an acre. So you can imagine the number, 60% of 1.2 million pounds, and then you've only changed the texture of that soil to the depth that you've added the sand.
So it's not going to
It's
end up
never
doing
gonna,
what you want.
And
So a better approach would
I like
be
to remind people too that when you make concrete, it's a mixture of sand and clay.
Yes,
right.
right,
So if you don't
absolutely.
get enough, you can actually make the situation worse. Better to add compost because then you're fostering the biology. You're getting the bacteria that are breaking it down. I mean, you want it. It should break down. You know, people are like, well, I add organic matter, but then it goes away. No, but that's fantastic. That's what you want, right? Because the bacteria that decompose it, they're going to produce natural glues and resins that help those particles stick together.
Really?
We talk about fungal mass in the soil, mycorrhiza, fungus, roots, rhiza. Those threads, as it grows out through the soil, are going to help bind those soil particles together, and you get that really nice, crumbly, aerated, healthy structure that plants can thrive in.
That is great. Now, I saw in some of the work that you were doing, you had this term, and it was like the soil as an ecosystem, and soil can be the furnace of life.
I think of it that way, right? I mean,
Can you explain that a little bit? Because that's pretty cool.
You think
And
about,
what is the fuel for this furnace?
You think about everything on the planet, right? Terrestrial life is dependent upon soils.
Absolutely.
And it's all about, converting energy that we can't use, the sunlight, into energy the rest of us can use. I mean, even the gasoline in the cars that we came here today is geologic sunlight, right?
Oh yeah.
That's been
captured star power.
Right, exactly. So to me, what I always think of, if you think of the furnace of life, the bacteria and the microorganisms in the soil are that fire that's supporting all the life, and the organic matter, the compost, the manures, in a natural system, just the leaf litter is the fuel that supports that magic combination. There's all these little balances happening in the soil. There's if you're familiar with composting, carbon to nitrogen ratio, right?
Oh yeah. Your browns and your greens.
So there's, in the soil, there's the carbon to nitrogen ratio, right? I mean, it's living, it's life. The bacteria, if there's not enough nitrogen, they're not going to consume a lot of carbon, right? But if you start adding a lot of nitrogen, they're going to consume carbon. I mean, it's the paradigm of life. They want to grow, they want to reproduce, right? Conversely, if you add a lot of carbon, because we could talk about adding sawdust to loosen those clay soils, which is a really bad idea.
Interesting, yeah.
Because, if you add a whole bunch of fine organic matter, you're now, again, that carbon to nitrogen ratio, it's going to balance itself out. In order for all those bacteria to consume all that carbon you've just added, they're going to use up your nitrogen, and your plants aren't going to grow.
That's where you hear people like, oh, I don't want to put like mulch into my soil because as it breaks down, it'll rob nitrogen.
It could potentially rob nitrogen.
Okay. Very cool.
So yeah, it's all about those balances, and as you garden, as you add air, if air is a limiting factor in the soil, right? The soil's heavy, but you're tilling it, and you're gonna, again, these are aerobic organisms. They like air. So if you add air, they can prosper and they can grow, and they're going to consume your organic matter. So it is kind of the thing where you just are in a constant cycle of replenishment.
That's how I know when my compost is doing pretty well, is when it smells just kind of earthy and fresh. Mm-hmm. But if it starts if you have too much fruit, I've noticed in some areas it's not getting mixed in, it starts smelling a little off, like some hot feet. They get that anaerobic breakdown. It's a little different.
Mm-hmm. Rotten egg, hydrogen.
Yeah, not quite as sweet smelling. Now, you keep bringing up the term organic matter, and you touched on it a little bit about what it is, but can you clarify for our listeners, like, when we talk about organic matter in the garden, like, compost. What is that, and then where are the sources?
Compost, manure, your own, my mother-in-law drives me crazy because for me, leaf litter, is the most beautiful thing. It's free.
I love it. I have
compost,
oak trees.
Right?
Yeah.
Like my trees drop their leaves. It's this nice barrier, but she's insisted that the soil should be clean and free of
tidy,
leaves,
yeah.
Right? So it's just anything that's carbon-based from, plant and animal material, basically.
Great.
For most people, it's going to be compost.
Well, let's get into it. It is the magic word. We've talked about this so much. Mycorrhiza. You touched on it a little bit, but I'd love for you.
So it is a symbiotic relationship between funguses and plants. I think probably 85-90% of the plants on the planet are mycorrhizal. There's a relationship between funguses and the plants.
How far back does this start?
450 million years. I mean, I think people who research it believe probably as the plants moved from the waters onto the...
I'll say that's about when trees kind of got started, around 400 million years ago, give or take.
It's a completely symbiotic relationship. I mean, these are funguses that interact with the root system of the plant. The plant can only grow so far into the soil, right? And what's miraculous about this is the mycorrhiza, there's some that are arbuscular, vesicular, I mean, which means that they live on the ectomycorrhiza, endomycorrhiza, inside the root system, on the root system. They actually interact with the plant, and they can so in a 5 meter by 5 meter area of natural soil, so 250 square feet roughly, right? There are 240,000 kilometers of fungal thread. That's 4 times...
Because they're super thin and microscopic.
And that teaspoon of soil, right? There are several kilometers of fungal hyphae. I mean, imagine being the grad student.
You linked them all together?
Who had to go through and parse all that out. But it's just, the tree root only grows so far. The fungus associates with the tree root. It's reaching out on the soil, solubilizing phosphorus, getting more moisture, accessing more water in the soil, bringing it to the plant. In exchange for that, I've read that I think in the Doug fir ecosystem, as much as 50% of the photosynthate. So that plant spends all that day in sunlight producing sugars. As much as 50% of the photosynthate is exuded out into the root system to feed the mycorrhiza. It gets crazier.
So it's like, hey, I'll give you a little love if you keep doing what you're doing.
And in return, the mycorrhiza is bringing in the phosphorus, bringing in nutrients, mineralizing nutrients, or taking, they believe, soil scientists believe that they can actually extract nutrients. They can solubilize phosphorus. Phosphorus is very tightly bound in the soil. It's very difficult to plants to access it, but the mycorrhiza can solubilize it and bring it into the plant, bring it into the root system of the plant. In the desert, they're pretty certain, and when I say they, scientists who study mycorrhiza are pretty certain that in the desert, the mycorrhiza can actually regulate the amount of moisture that the plant's able to use. Because the plant is just a giant siphon, right? There's high pressure water in the soil, low pressure in the atmosphere, just the water moves from high pressure to low pressure. Why is a redwood tree 350 feet tall, whatever it is? Because that's the farthest water will go up a little tiny tube.
Is that the limiting factor?
That's the limiting factor of the height of a redwood tree, right? The mycorrhiza can actually regulate the flow of moisture into the plant because they don't want that giant host to die and expire, right?
Yeah.
There's that symbiotic
keep it steady.
relationship. Keep it steady. I mean, it's amazing. They can move between trees. They can move, photosynthate from this tree to that tree. I mean, it's just a remarkable thing that's happening under our feet.
Yeah, and I've heard some research where they're trying to figure out, can trees communicate through their root system, through their fungal networks? Is that kind of connected?
Yes.
That's wild to think about.
Absolutely crazy.
I'm loving it. That's so cool. And I've heard too that there's different species of mycorrhiza, and then some of them are really unique to some plants.
You know mycorrhiza. Like, if you have ever eaten a chanterelle, you are eating a mycorrhiza fruiting body. If you've ever eaten a morel, you are eating a mycorrhiza fruiting body. Boletus mushroom, you're eating a mycorrhiza fruiting body.
Love eating mushrooms.
Right? I mean, it's all...
Really? Okay. That is so cool. Now, fertilizers, what are the pros and cons for synthetic fertilizers versus organic? I would love that.
So synthetic, we can call them conventional, traditional, synthetic. I mean, the pros are they're affordable, and they're fast acting. That's probably they're easy to use.
That's the allure.
That's and you'll get a quick response. Like even though my background is organic, when I worked in retail, if somebody came in with a really visibly deficient houseplant, for example. The analogy I would use, it's sort of like if you go to the cardiologist when you're having a heart attack, yes, changing your diet and all of those things are important, but it's a little bit late at that point. You need that chronic intervention, right? Or that immediate intervention. So to me, the synthetic fertilizers, the water solubles, things like that can play that role of getting a plant healthy again, and then we can address the underlying problems with the soils, right? So the advantages of synthetics would be immediate availability. You can get a wider variety of trace minerals added in organic fertilizer. You don't have to wait for the soil to break them down, and they typically are more affordable. They're not, the ingredients aren't as expensive. The drawback is they're salts. You can burn with them. The drawbacks, in my mind, are you're not really working in concert with the soil system. You're short-circuiting it. It's a little bit like junk food compared to a more healthy diet. if you're adding a lot of free nitrogen, we go back to that balance in the soil. You're gonna burn up your carbon, so you're still gonna need to add organic matter. I can remember, early in my gardening days, a woman coming in saying, my garden used to be so productive, and I fertilize and I fertilize and I fertilize, and it's less and less productive, even though I put more and more fertilizer on. Well, because you've burned up all your organic matter, right? Your soil's no longer.
Meanwhile, the soil is just exhausted.
It's exhausted, right? And you're pouring more and more chemistry on and getting less and declining returns, as it were. The other end would the organic fertilizers. They're all carbon-based. I mean, we do have the natural components, but for the most part, most of the nutrients are going to be from a carbon source. They're slow release. They're long-lasting. Could you burn with them? In theory, if you worked hard enough, you might be able to with blood meal or something like that. But most of the time, you don't have to worry about burning. You're working in concert with the biology, right? You're feeding the biology. You're feeding that system. You're feeding those microorganisms that are, beneficial in so many different ways. The fertilizer has to be broken down. So on the one hand, where you can put the conventional synthetic on the top and let water wash it in, with the organics you should mix it in or put a mulch there so it's engaged with the biology. But it's just the way nature intended things to be, right?
I love it.
Slow release, long lasting, non-burning. What's not to love about that? Right?
What are your thoughts on worm castings?
Incredible, incredible. We use it as an ingredient. It's a great supplement. They are unique in the sense that they're probably almost perfectly balanced. Nutrients in terms of the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potash, the nutrients are very readily available. It's a great way they're great for tomatoes. I wouldn't probably use earthworm castings when you plant your tomatoes, but once they were established, side dressing with earthworm castings. In a container situation, if you've had plants in a container and that you feel like the potting soil is just getting a little depleted, mixing earthworm castings in would be an excellent way to sort of throw some life back in. If I was doing my own raised beds, I might add a little bit of extra earthworm castings. Again, you don't.
Because you can just blend it right into your soil.
Just a small amount, just as a little added booster, a little more magic in the mix.
If you could give just maybe like one piece of advice to someone who's listening right now, who's maybe new to gardening and growing, and we want them to be successful, what would that advice be?
Feed your soil, not your plants. Take care of your soil. You make the investment in the soil, and your plants will appreciate it. Give the plants a chance, I think was Travis's line the other night. Invest in the soil. Don't neglect when you're planting, improving the soil. I mean, that's the best insurance policy for your garden.
Well, Chris, I've learned so much. Thank you so much for coming out and making time for us, making that 8,000-mile trip just so we could talk plants and soil.
My pleasure.
All right, we are back from our interview with Chris. Thank you so much, Chris. I actually learned a lot, and I had so much fun. It was a pleasure to meet you, and such a cool topic. I love learning more and more about soil. It is fascinating to me, Kevin. It makes me, it makes me want to get a microscope.
You know what's fun? Absolutely.
I
recommend
don't have that.
They have there's handheld microscopes that you can have for gardening and growing. I've seen digital microscopes, so you can hook it up to your computer. I know you're a techie guy. It's one of those things where once you start seeing what's in the soil, you go, oh my gosh, it is alive. Chris brought up in our talk, like just a handful of soil, healthy soil, will have more microbes, living organisms in it than there are humans on the planet. So billions of microbes in a handful of healthy soil. I was sifting compost not too long ago, so I guess I'm probably covered in microbes right now, or at least I was earlier.
Mind-boggling.
It's pretty cool. It's like some people like to play in the sand. People like us and Chris like to play in the sand, silt, and clay. So it was cool to hear about the rock particle sizes and how that affects, how much nutrition your soil holds, how much water it can hold, how much air can flow through. And I think his concept of soil as an ecosystem, soil as a living organism, soil as the furnace of life. And if you want to keep that furnace burning, to keep those flames burning, you have to feed it fuel. And in this case, the fuel that he talked about is organic matter. As that organic matter goes in there, fungus, bacteria start nibbling away at it. They break it down and they keep that fire humming along. And it's all that's in this case the flames, right? The heat of that. That's what's feeding our garden. It's as those nutrients break down, they're made usable. all that organic matter increases, the water absorption, the aeration. There's so many things we talked about. If your soil is hard pan and clay and just holds water, and you can't, you can barely put a pick into it.
The answer is organic
matter. Yeah, organic matter, organic material. And then sand. What's the solution for that?
Organic matter.
Yes. And so it's kind of cool. So organic matter, compost, it has so much benefit to our garden, to our landscape.
Yeah.
Like we mentioned in the beginning, if you want a lush, thriving veggie garden, or you want the flower bed to be the envy of everybody, it starts with the soil. And you have to nourish that soil each and every season. We do it twice a year at our own garden. But some people might do it once, or some people even do it more often. Mm-hmm. But adding that organic matter is so key, even to a garden that has already started off with decent soil.
Sure.
You've got to replenish it, because
I did it to mine.
That fire needs fuel. So I love that idea. Hearing how mycorrhiza has that over 400 million year relationship with terrestrial plants. That's pretty sick. I thought it was so interesting.
It kind of, you know what it reminded me of? So I just learned about, maybe this is a little too tangential, but I just learned about lichen and how they're
multiple species.
Yeah. One living thing is actually like an algae and a fungus together. And it's like kind of breaks your head to think about it, but really it's more common than you think. That I forget the name for it, but there's
symbiosis,
something like that, right? Like we actually think of ourselves as a singular being, but really we're made up of a gut filled with a microbiome of many beings, and we rely on that. And soil's the same, and plants are the same way. Everything is so interconnected. It's really fascinating to me.
I loved it. And for us, we always are trying to push our listeners, or not push, but encourage people to grow organically and use organics and reduce their pesticide use, and reduce their use of synthetic fertilizers if possible. And so to do that really starts with the soil. And so I thought it was a great lesson. And I know there's a lot of people out there that are just dying to have delicious homegrown fruit, vegetables, ones that aren't so expensive, ones that aren't so flavorless like they may get at their stores. And like I said, success starts with the soil. So thank you so much to Chris Totten for coming out to us. I mean, he flew all the way out from Bulgaria to meet with us. That's like
awesome.
9,000 miles. So thank you so much to Chris. We appreciate your knowledge and your experience. And I'm gonna put it to work in our own garden. I'm feeding that furnace. We're adding organic matter, chicken manure, earthworm castings. We've got the compost and much more that we're going to add. And so for us, I've seen the results. We started at our own garden. It was lifeless, hard pan clay. You couldn't even put like a pickaxe into it. Wouldn't even, it'd spark off the top of it. Now it's lush. You could almost just lay in it like a bed. It's so fluffy and light. I love it. So I love it. It's just great lessons. And I hope our listeners are feeling successful. They're feeling that they can be successful this year. And so I know there's a lot of people that are just they're eager. We're all champing at the bit to get this season going. And right now is the time. So if you haven't already, get your seeds started, get your seedlings in the ground, and feed that soil for success. Well, that about wraps it up for this week, garden friends. I wish you all an amazing week. Please get out in that garden, get some dirt underneath those nails, get stuff planted. Happy gardening to you all, and please never stop growing.